Let's check in with the doc and look at things with a wider lens. Pastor Richards on OMG.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
How are you doing?
Doing very, very well. Very well. Trust that you are too?
Yes.
Okay, and
Yes.
all is well with well, never mind that, okay. Well, I hope he's well too, okay?
Okay. Bing, the quote-unquote bad man.
Yeah, I noticed he came in for a couple of days, and then maybe, I don't know if that drove up his blood pressure. I don't think he can keep himself in check. He is so passionate about what he's doing. That he brings it every time, and he doesn't bring 50% or 60%. He brings 110%. So.
Yeah. So I hope that he's able to navigate his way back to us.
Daniel, I don't know if others have told you, but I want to tell you, I think you've done a really good job over the period there. Really, I think so. You handle. I watch all kind of situations thrown your way, including technical stuff and instrument and malfunctioning stuff and all of that.
You notice those too?
Yeah, pick up on things, because you talk over it. For example, this morning, things are going haywire with the calling in system and all of that, and you manage to just keep a level head and just keep talking through it. So that's good stuff. And then when you handle your interviews, and sometimes, it gets a little bit dicey and tricky there, but you always... That's a level of maturity. So, you're a good foil for Bing. You're calm-headed. You're very, very calm-headed.
I try. Thank you, Pastor. It means a lot coming from you.
Well, thank you. For
I ever since I've had a lot of respect, and I admire you a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
Thank you for that. So I hope I won't disappoint you, boy.
What?
When you say stuff like that, and then Mr. Weeks says stuff like that.
I may not always agree with everything that you say.
I know, but you can.
Which is fine.
You can.
But I respect you. This not because I disagree. Sometimes mean that I don't have a deep respect and admiration for you. Yeah.
Daniel, this morning, the things that are stirring in my head this morning, the Union Island thing. I listened real. And by the way, you and Mario handled that well, and Jerry also, navigating yourself away from the politics of it and speaking about it from a purely human point of view.
Right.
And I thought that was admirable, because something like this can be weaponized politically, and all kind of irresponsible statements can be made. And you and Mario and Jerry, I thought, got away from that, which is really, really admirable. But I want to add my condolences to those who are really feeling the pain, especially in a close-knit community like Union Island. I've been there a few times, and I understand that community is, although St. Vincent is a small island and we have a particular characteristic in terms of social life, Union Island is even much more connected. It's really like a bedroom community. It's everybody knows everybody, and so this would even exacerbate the pain, the effect that they're feeling. One of the things that came out, though, is I think Jerry mentioned it yesterday or a couple of days ago, and then I heard it again this morning. Regulations, whether or not a gas station should be in that particular community. And then I heard John, I think, is the person that did that article that you guys were reading from. In a built-up community where you have close proximity to houses, very, very close proximity to houses, whether or not a gas station should be there. And I don't do zoning, I'm not in public planning and all of that, but simple common sense would tell you I don't know on which planet that could pass even the most flexible of policies or rules or regulations governing. But it had been allowed to exist. Hesitating with this, with what is allowed there. The lack of a real tight or strict regulation, control, even not just the gas station, but in terms of how the administration there, in terms of hospital, is set up. procedures for if an ambulance is off island. I'm not saying that if an ambulance had been there, that things would have necessarily, the outcome would have been, I can't speak to that from a medical point of view. But what I am hearing is that an ambulance was off island for whatever reason, maintenance or whatever, but there was not another one there. So this speaks to a matter of procedure, not necessarily the tightness of procedure. Or policies or protocols, the various nuances between these. Right. Daniel, truth be told again, it is not just the proximity of the gas station to built-up communities, it's not just the situation with the ambulance, it's just about every sphere of life. I have talked about this over and over again, that we don't have the tightest of procedures, we don't have the strictest of policies governing even use of government vehicles here on the mainland. We really, whether there are things in place or not governing how they should be used and whether for personal use or for that, they gassed up with taxpayers' money as far as I know. And I see people driving these. I have actually seen people dropping their girlfriend's child to school I've seen it using a government vehicle. Slackness. In terms of zoning, in terms of planning and how houses are constructed around here, again, it's the same thing. We don't need, you just about on every hillside there's a house, and some of it, I know around the Jacks Wall area there, out in Prospect, a lot of issues were raised about whether or not it was properly constructed, who regulated that, who gave the sign-off, did it meet all of the safety requirements, I think it came down twice, or different sections of it came down on different occasions. So, but you have this all across St. Vincent. It's not only that wall. A number of houses are in precarious situation, which under the tightest controlled by a civil engineer or any engineer signing off on that, you would question whether or not it should be signed off on. And so these things obtain in St. Vincent, and I wonder if it is for the good or for the bad. On previous commentaries, I have said that you really should take the good with the bad, because it is very clear to me that we are not an over-regulated society. We really are not. No. A lot of things here are laissez-faire. And even in the, how do I say this? Even in the management of our response to the COVID pandemic, we have not been over-regulated, and the measures have not been as stringent and in other places. The mentality here in St. Vincent, I used the word laissez-faire a while ago, but maybe that has the wrong connotation. But the mentality is to ease off and let people adapt. That has been the mentality. And it has worked well in situations where people have had limited resources, in the situations in which people need to be flexible to maneuver to life's challenges. The lack of regulations or minimizing regulation is a plus. The more regulated you are, the more difficult it is to adapt. And I am asking the question. I almost made a comment. Let me ask the question this way: Are we okay with the fact that we are not a highly regulated society? Do we see this as being an advantage to us? Now, mind you, there are other countries in the world where just about everything, including putting a gutter on your house during the fall, there are policies, protocols, and procedures governing every behavior. In some zoning areas, even how high your grass grows in certain zones, that's regulated. How you dump your garbage, how you paint your house, what colors, what type of brickwork, everything is just regulated. It's a regulated society that really ties your hand, and it makes you feel kind of confined. And in St. Vincent here, we don't have that. But once that is the case, once you have a minimizing of your policies, and again, this is not just with respect to where a gas station is located, but frankly speaking, if there were tighter or more rigid policies there and protocols and procedures, that could not have happened. But then, where on Union Island could you have put this? And, sometimes too regulated things mean that you put people out of business, or you put people out of a little something on their table. Look at the Market Square in Kingston. That's really not regulated. It's really not regulated. There are things there, there are rules, there are regulations, but it's in terms of the enforcement. There was a time when Gold Teeth had gone around and that tried to enforce some regulations, and you saw the backlash of that.
Oh yeah, all the time.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is that sometimes the minimizing of the regulations, or not enforcing them, or not holding us to the strictest of regulation, whether it has to do with commerce in town, or building codes, or where gas stations are located, or how to move ambulance and all of that. All of these are, I just, off the top of my head, I was just giving some evidences that we are really not regulated. And more often than not, this works to our advantage. But there are times that, it is really going to backfire when a wall falls down and buries a woman beneath it. When a gas station is exploding and 3 people die. When an ambulance is not on the island when it is needed, and people have to be put in the back of a pickup truck. So there are times when it just blows up in your face. And even with response to COVID, if something were to really break loose here in St. Vincent, where, the most rigid of regulations have not been in place, then there will be some to point and say, look, you see, if we had more stringent regulations, this would not have happened. True. But also, if we have more stringent regulations, a lot of the things that flexibility that people have, and the things they're able to maneuver and do and eke out a living and get by, they won't be able to do it. I'm just saying that, it is something that before we begin to cry out too hard and too loudly, let us be over-regulated. Regulate everything, policies for everything, procedures for everything, protocols, dot every I, cross every T. Before we are willing to call for our own collar and noose and chain, let's be understanding what we are calling for. Okay? So that's on the Union Island thing.
Pastor, before you continue, I don't want you to jump out of Union Island before I ask this question. While listening to you speaking, on the question of being regulated or not.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what would God want? Or is there anything in the Bible that leans toward should a people be regulated or not?
Wonderful. God is a God of order.
Mm-hmm.
Very clearly, in the way He has ordered the universe and ordered creation. He's also a God of laws. From the Old Testament, He regulated society. In fact, when the Hebrew people were coming out of Egypt and becoming a nation unto themselves, the very first thing that He did was give them a constitution.
Okay.
Just like we got a constitution, Moses went up to the Mount of Sinai, and God gave them, first of all, the religious aspect of the constitution. And then He gave them the civil aspect of the Constitution. Consequently, a bunch of laws that He gave. Most of us are familiar with the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, but there are many others that He gave to structure that society. So He's a God of laws. But interestingly also, He's a God of freedom, because he understands that. In fact, in the New Testament, he says, the Pharisees, who were the ones who, because the laws were there, they were always just obey the law, holding you to every policy, procedure, protocol. Obey. And because of this, there was a significant loss of freedom. So the drive in the New Testament is towards liberty. In fact, it was Christ who said, look, my purpose for interjecting myself into the human sphere is to bring liberty. He said in Luke chapter 4 and 18, to bring liberty and freedom. So laws can, and the Bible recognizes that laws can become very oppressive if we are being basically told obey the letter of the law, because behind every law is supposed to be a facility or facilitation of the people of whom the law is there for. And so the Bible understands that it's not about the law. The law is there for the control, but it is the control of the people for the good of the people. And the New Testament puts a different twist on it. Basically that we want freedom. Christ came to set us free and to give us freedom. And so the drive of the New Testament is therefore to show people that ultimately it is their freedom that matters most. The laws were only meant to be a guide towards that freedom. And the laws are useful in and of themselves, don't get me wrong. But when the law becomes the end, and when I say law, policies, procedures, protocols, regulations, when that become an end in itself, that it stifles the good of the people, then it is no good. In fact, a very interesting passage to read about this is Luke chapter 11, that talks about those who at all cost want to enforce the law, the policies and the procedures. I think Christ himself calls them, it was it's not, I won't say a vulgar term, but it's a very harsh term. He said, look at you. He actually called them whitewashed sepulchres. If you understand what that means and the kind of language that is, he's calling them whitewashed sepulchres. He's like, you're like grave people. Look at you. Because they want laws in place, procedures in place. They hammer home procedures over the welfare of the people. So my point, again, and I'm glad you asked that, is a very insightful question. I think you're asking, what is God's perspective on law over the good of the people, regulations or the good of the people? And with respect to what we are discussing this morning, for those who are saying this should not have happened if we had all of the regulations and protocols in place, but certain freedoms and flexibilities are given, to allow for the good of the people. And they are not to be seen in contradiction of the law. They are to be seen, like Christ said, in fulfill really what's the meaning of the law, to make sure that people can benefit. So the long and the short of this, I better wrap up with this one. The long and the short of it is, this is a dicey one. Regulations are good. Procedures are good, you need them. Protocols and policies are good, but there are times when you have to back off the stringent and rigid application of these so that people can actually eke out a life. I am happy, from my personal point of view, I'm not advocating this for anyone else, so please don't judge me on it, but I am happy that I live in a society that is not over-regulated. There are other places that are highly litigious. Litigious meaning everything is litigated to the hilt, because you fall on a floor, you sue the company. You throw things, you keep your yard in a particular way, you say something, you get a suit. A lawsuit, you look at somebody in the wrong way in the office, there's a regulation as to how you should look at people in your office. What you should say at the water cooler, there's regulation governing what you should say at the water cooler. You say the wrong thing to a guy or to a girl at the water cooler, you're probably looking at a lawsuit. So I've been in a society where it is highly litigious. It just civil suit, lawsuit. And I think that's not good when you have too much regulations that are enforced. It's a real stifling thing. And so for my part, I am glad I am glad that we live in a society that is not overregulated, because if a society like St. Vincent was overregulated, let us say even in terms of the planning code, a lot of buildings that are up, a lot of homes where people have independence and have homes and are living in their own home, they would not have been able to build, to start from the ground up, build a foundation, and then a year later put on the first floor, and then a year later begin to plaster. A lot of it will not pass the building code. It will not. But because of the fact that it is not over-regulated, people are afforded homes. But here's the thing. Is there a risk to that? Of course there's a risk. Because in extreme situations, if there's slippage of land or the land becomes oversaturated or whatever, because these buildings do not necessarily meet the strictest of building codes, they won't go up. Look at this church, for example. This church, I brought in some friends here towards the completion of the church from the United States, and some of them are highly skilled, and they said, man, the number of codes that we would have been in violation of in the putting up of this church, if it was in the U.S., they said, no way. And a lot of times, adhering to the codes and safety precautions and all of that will just add practically double safety equipment and stuff for your workers and all, will double the building cost. We don't have that here, so I am glad, or we should be glad that these things, and like I said, and not just building, but in everything, I don't know that we are an over-regulated society, and it brings quite a bit of benefits to us, but it also comes with some risks. I think that's enough for one day.
I do have questions, but I'll leave that because we are.
Really? I really wanted to talk about that thing, what's going on in Minneapolis. There is really getting to me. And yesterday I said we don't need to be judging. I mean, it really has gotten to me. This, black man killed by the cop there. And yesterday I talked about my own experiences in the United States, and I also was careful to say yesterday I don't want to globalize because of the anecdotal, and I don't want, because most of my friends in the United States are white friends, and that doesn't mean there's a measure of partiality there, but I'm just saying from years of interaction with my friends, I can't characterize them by what this policeman is doing. I can't take one brush and paint whites in America by what this. I mean, there's some really messed up sick people who do sick things. But we have to be very careful that we don't too quickly move, like we do here in St. Vincent sometimes, that we don't quickly move from the particular to the universal, that we take one incident with one police here in St. Vincent and label the whole force, that we take one incident at hospital and paint a picture of the whole healthcare system, that we don't take one teacher or one incident at one school and label the whole education system. We have to be very careful. A friend of mine, a pastor friend, reminded me yesterday, he said, we too quickly move from the outliers to the normative. Even in this handling of the COVID, most of the policies and procedures and everything that is constructed is not based on what happens to somebody, the average person who is getting the coronavirus. A lot of the outliers basically shock us into taking very, very drastic action. So this whole thing speaks to how quickly we want to globalize that which old people used to say, there's the exception to the rule, and whether or not our behavior is guided by the exception or guided by the rule. Whether we move on the basis of the anecdotal minority or we move on the basis of this is what really happens in the majority of time. These are things to consider. Have a good day.
Thanks, Pastor. Have a good day as well.
Let's check in with the doc and look at things with a wider lens. Pastor Richards on OMG.